In our final State of the Denver Broncos outlook after NFL free agency leading up to the NFL draft, we take a look at the interior offensive line. Is it better for the Broncos coming into 2023? We ask that question and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in and making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day as you work out, as you make breakfast, as you go to work. We appreciate you so much, and shout out to all the everyday listeners in Broncos Country. To make sure you get every episode as soon as it is made available, make sure you hit that subscribe or that follow button for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my good friend, my co-host. He is Sayre Bedinger. He is the site expert at predominantlyorange.com, and we are here in the final installment of our State of the Broncos after NFL free agency. We may take a look at this again after the NFL draft, but with only 5 picks this week, it's going to be very interesting to see how things shake out. But the question is, what does the Broncos' interior offensive line look like after NFL free agency? And we're going to pose the question, did they get better? In order to analyze that, we have to take a look at what it looks like at guard and at center for the Broncos.
Well, we do, Cody, and this could be one of those position groups that, hey, we talk about this a couple days before the NFL draft, and then a couple days after the draft, we're like, okay, so who's now going to be the starting center? So we don't exactly know what's going to happen, but as of right now, it does seem like you can pencil in Ben Powers as the new starting left guard. Obviously, the Broncos add him on the big money contract in free agency. And opposite him at right guard, I think we know Quinn Meinerz, he's going to be that guy. In the middle at the center position, it does sound like Lloyd Cushenberry is going to be the starter there. So you look at that starting group, Cody, and that's going to form the question that we're going to answer later on in the show. Is this a better interior offensive line than what the Broncos had last season? Of course, the key loss, after we talk about the key addition of Ben Powers, the key loss was Dalton Risner there at the left guard position. That is the big difference, obviously, going into this season. Let's talk about, though, the starters and the key additions. Of course, it wasn't just Ben Powers joining the interior offensive line this offseason. We also got a part 2 of Kyle Fuller there. Let's talk about this starting group for the Broncos on the offensive line. Lloyd Cushenberry back healthy, Quinn Meinerz and Ben Powers there, now the starting left guard for the Broncos.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at those names there's definitely some question marks, but there's also excitement. And I think the excitement really lies at the guard position, right? Right guard, we know how good Quinn Meinerz is. He's a mauler. And, last year was a very interesting year for him. He suffered that hamstring injury week 1, and then he had an ankle injury that he battled through a little bit throughout the season. But, man, he's as tough as they come, and I'm very curious to see what step he takes this upcoming season as the right guard. But Ben Powers, I think we're all excited about what he can bring to the table. Having played in an offense that is really predicated off pounding the rock already, he fits the mold for what Sean Payton and Zach Strief, the new offensive line coach, what they want from an offensive lineman in the room. Tough, tenacious, physical. Look, he's not the most athletic guard, but he doesn't have to be. He's a technician. He's fundamental. And when you watch him pull, he understands how to attack angles. He knows if there's a defender, if there's a linebacker coming up, he knows which shoulder to attack first and then to hedge out to free up a running lane for the running back. He's very, very smart, and I liked what I saw from him coming out of the Baltimore Ravens last year. And obviously they had a high-powered offense that's, as we mentioned, predicated off of running the football. Even though that they dealt with a lot of injuries to the running back position, they still formulated 1,000-yard rushers in Baltimore under the Harbaugh system with Lamar Jackson at the quarterback position. Even Tyler Huntley, when he had to step in and play, he could be maybe the best offseason signing for the Broncos. Maybe that's a projection. We'll obviously reevaluate once we get to the bye week. How have the free agency signings done so far in the first half of the season? We're a long ways away from that, though. But there is excitement to be had there. And as you mentioned, question mark with Lloyd Cushenberry. The biggest thing that I think both agree on for him, He's got to get physically stronger in the upper body. He's got to get, a little bit more discipline in terms of his footwork there a little bit, because there are times where teams try to attack him one-on-one. They'll slant across his face, send a linebacker in. There's just got to be better overall cohesion, I'd say, between the center, the guards, ultimately here if the Broncos offense wants to sustain. Now, you mentioned the loss of Dalton Risner. Denver also lost a pretty good role player as well, who ended up starting at center last year after injuries, and that is Graham Glasgow. But I'm curious for your thoughts here, Sayre. Like, what is your outlook here on the addition of Ben Powers at left guard, Quinn Meinerz at right guard, and then Lloyd Cushenberry? Do you feel confident right now, maybe in those three? Because I think the inner workings of this offense are really it's going to start with the center. Obviously, tackles are super important, but really it's the cohesion between the center and the guards that really, I think, lead to the offense working.
And you need to have that, because how many times have we seen over the last couple of seasons, not just with Russell Wilson, but it could be Drew Lock out there, it could be Teddy Bridgewater, it could be any number of guys out there, how much interior pressure the Broncos have been giving up on that offensive line. It's been pretty substantial, in my opinion, I would say. And that's not just in terms of when the quarterback drops back to pass either, is it? I think that we've had to, how many times did we have to say during the last couple seasons, man, Javonte Williams really made something out of nothing there after just the defense just blew up at the line of scrimmage. That happened way too often. You talk about Lloyd Cushenberry needing to get stronger in the upper body and more discipline with the footwork. I think that having a guy like Ben Powers, it's not going to make him stronger. It's not going to make him more disciplined in his footwork, but it is going to, at times during the season, I think we're going to be able to point out the difference between Ben Powers and Dalton Risner. With all due respect to Risner, I think we're going to be able to say, because Ben Powers, how many sacks he given up over the last couple of years? I mean, barely any, if any, barely gives up any pressures, much less sacks. So we're talking about a guy here who is very proficient in the department of pass protection. I think we're going to be able to say, man, he really made a difference there with that blitz that was coming in. He identified it. He, smacked Lloyd Cushenberry on the arm or on the shoulder or whatever, and they picked it up. They figured it out. That communication has not been there on the Broncos offensive line. And to their credit, I mean, Cody, how many different variations and combinations of players did they have to work with there? We know cohesion and continuity on the offensive line is so important. So hopefully, I mean, you hope your guys can stay healthy. But I think having a guy like Ben Powers out there who's been very, very excellent as a pass protector and obviously played in an offense in Baltimore where, hey, he's being asked to pave new road out there as much as they run the ball. He's going to be able to come in and make a huge difference on that left side of the offensive line, I think. And then Quinn Meinerz, he's just growing as a player, right? We've seen him. I think we called him a number of times last year the best offensive lineman the Broncos had. When he went down with injury earlier in the season, we're like, dang, the Broncos just lost their best O-lineman. At least he was playing as the best O-lineman. So if Meinerz takes that next step, you got Ben Powers coming in. He's proven what he can do. He's a big money player. Lloyd Cushenberry, I think, benefits from all that. Cody, I think this unit has a chance to be one of the most improved on the team this season.
That's the hope, right? And if they are improved, I think it does spell good things for the Broncos offense. To kind of make an interesting note about last year, like Sayre, there was at one point 8 weeks in a row where the Broncos had a different starting offensive line unit. I think it was 8 weeks in a row. Unbelievable. And obviously, we can talk about the mismanagement of, from Butch Berry with several guys, but we can harp on that. We'll see how the Miami Dolphins deal with that this upcoming season. But with that said, Broncos country, we take a look at the Broncos' depth behind the projected starters on the interior offensive line at guard and at center. You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at Built Bar, and something exciting is coming to Built.com, a brand new mystery flavor that you can find out by going to Built.com here today to see. The excitement is real, and it's something that you won't want to miss. And if you know how Built works, they have the most incredible protein bars in the world, and they do these amazing flavor drops with unreal flavors in limited quantity. So make sure you check out Built.com for the drop of the mystery flavor to be one of the first to discover what all the hype is about. I can't wait to see what this new flavor is. Make sure to use promo code LOCKEDON15 and you'll get 15% off your order at Built.com.
Cody, we got to talk about the depth of the Denver Broncos interior offensive line. Of course, we talked about some of the comings and goings on the interior offensive line. That affects the depth significantly. We talked about Graham Glasgow starting a significant portion of last season as the backup interior offensive lineman. Remember, the Broncos restructured his deal last offseason to get him back. This year, though, the offensive line, specifically on the interior, we already talked about the tackle depth on the previous episode, which you should all go check out if you haven't already. The interior offensive line depth is going to change as well. How do you view, I guess, if the Broncos needed somebody this weekend, if they were playing a game, who is going to be that top interior backup as of right now?
In my opinion, looking at, obviously the guys who departed the Broncos versus the guys who are back, I'd have to say Quinn Bailey, the guy who's been on the roster since 2019. I mean, Sayre, this is a guy who's, been on the practice squad, has been activated, the active roster, has started some games for the Broncos. And to be honest with you, I thought he actually did a pretty good job filling in at the guard position versus tackle in the times where he has been put on the field for the Broncos in the past couple of seasons. He is back as an ERFA. He signed his tender. To be honest with you, he's the one guy right now. I'm like, all right, hey, Quinn Bailey. Quinn Bailey is the guy. He's consistently working, consistently improving. And you know what? You never hear anything about him. You never see him ever publicize anything. I think the guy who shows what he does the most in terms of his work, Matt McChesney, a good friend of the show over there at 6-0 Strength here in Parker, Colorado, works with him every week. And you just see the strides that he has taken. So, I mean, for the fact that he's been on the roster since 2019, 2 different coaching staffs, now going into his 3rd different coaching staff, I applaud him. He would be my selection if Denver had to have a guy play this weekend if somebody were to go down between Ben Powers and even Quinn Meinerz. I'm a big guy, big fan of Quinn Bailey. Now, my question, I'm going to throw it right back to you. Like, who do you feel like? Is it Quinn Bailey or is it somebody else if you had to answer the same question?
Well, I suppose somebody who does have some starting experience is the new free agent signing Kyle Fuller at the center position. I don't know where he falls in terms of playing the guard position as well, but Cody, we know he could step in and play some center if need be. He's done it before. He played with Russ in Seattle in 2021, so he's started some games. What about Luke Wattenberg? What about this guy? He's kind of the wild card in all of this, isn't he? He's a guy the Broncos actually traded up for in the 2022 NFL draft out of Washington. Kind of an older prospect coming out, but somebody who did play virtually every position on the offensive line at Washington. Kind of has the body type of an offensive tackle, but maybe projects best to center or guard at the NFL. I don't know if the tackle experiment with him is quite over with. We'll see, Cody. We know he has played there in college. Maybe the Broncos could flip him as like their, I don't know, utility guy on the offensive line to say, hey, you're the new Billy Turner or something like that. If we need you to play any of the 5 spots, you got to go out there and do it. I think Luke Wattenberg has to kind of develop into that guy who is that top interior offensive line backup. And what does that look like? What does your cat think? What does Loki think about this, Cody? And for those who are just listening and not watching, Loki has made an appearance.
Luke Wattenberg or no?
What is
Luke Wattenberg?
Luke Wattenberg?
Nope, he does not like Luke Wattenberg for some reason. Nope, all right.
He's not about Luke Wattenberg, but that's okay.
Not.
You know what? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll see. Maybe that's kind of a foreshadowing. What will the Broncos do in the draft because of Loki's analysis of Luke Wattenberg, Cody? I guess we'll find out. But I think, I don't know. Maybe there's something there with him that he could be that guy who's kind of your new Glasgow, your new Billy Turner on the offensive line.
I think he also got a little bit of a raw deal last year. I'll be honest with you, Sayre. I asked Nathaniel Hackett at one point last year about Luke because he got thrown into the game mid-game and struggled. Look, he wasn't fresh and whatnot, didn't have any snaps. He was taking his first snaps in the NFL in a regular season game, and they just kind of threw him into the fire. And granted, it wasn't necessarily his fault, but Nathaniel Hackett even told me one week that, yeah, us coaches have to do a better job of putting our guys in a better position to succeed. And so we saw that. He ended up playing some guard, though, toward the end of the season. And Sayre, I'll be honest with you, I kind of liked what I saw there. I think there was a little confidence there. But as you mentioned, this is a guy who could play center, could play guard, could play tackle. You don't give up on a guy like that, right? Maybe he's not your center guy. Maybe he's not a guy who's going to compete to be the center in this Broncos offense, right? Maybe that's why they brought in Kyle Fuller. But maybe they do view him as a guard option. Maybe they do view him as a tackle option. I think Denver's trying to find guys who can do a little bit of both. I think that's really kind of the transition we're now seeing in the NFL, where teams are looking for guys who don't just specialize in one area, but if the injury happens, you can bump one guy down to another position, bring in another guy, and still maintain your overall organizational continuity from a schematic standpoint. To me, I think that's what Sean Payton's going for. I think that's what new offensive line coach Zach Strief is going for. And as I can recollect from watching the Saints for all these years, I also believe that was also part of maybe what they did in New Orleans. So if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Because this offense is predicated on running the football. And because you run the football and it's going to be a high volume of rushing attempts for Denver this season, you have more opportunities, more risks for being injured, for guys getting banged up, and you have to have the next guy be ready. I mean, it is a next man up mentality here. You don't want to lose a key guy, but you need to make sure you have some guys that can alleviate the blow a little bit and soften the landing here for the Broncos. They might have a couple of guys on the roster like that. I think Quinn Bailey could be that. Luke Wattenberg has growth tools to be able to do that. He's going to get an opportunity with his new coaching staff, though.
Well, and so are potentially some new draft picks coming in. As we talk about the depth for this position group, I think you have to look at the 2023 NFL draft for opportunities to upgrade in that department. Maybe even, I know a lot of people think that one of these third-round picks could turn out to be the starting center. I found it very interesting, Cody. Our good friend Mike Kliss of 9 News in Denver, he put out the list of pre-draft interview guys that have come in for, the top 30 visits. They've come to Denver, talked with the coaching staff, probably the medical staff, probably the front office and all that good stuff. One of the only offensive linemen that we know of that's been brought in is this guy, Jordan Brooks, out of Arkansas State. And in the little description that Kliss wrote about him, he said something that Sean Payton likes in the interior offensive line guys is specifically, he was talking about size and length. This dude has 36-inch arms. So if length is something to be looking out for on the interior offensive line, maybe keep that in mind as you're looking up guys at their RAS scores, you're looking up their pre-draft metrics and things like that. If you're looking for interior offensive linemen that Sean Payton likes, which, by the way, Lloyd Cushenberry, 34-inch arms, Luke Wattenberg, 34-inch arms, Ben Powers, 33 3/4. If you're looking for interior, also Quinn Meinerz, by the way, he could have easily projected as a tackle. He has the measurements to do so as well. Cody, maybe the interior offensive lineman, we should get that list at the cutoff, maybe 33 3/4-inch arms and up in terms of the length that this coaching staff and front office might be targeting on the interior.
Can these mock draft simulators create filters where we could just do that? I mean, that would eliminate things very drastically for us as well. And we all know the NFL draft begins on Thursday. And if you're an everyday listener of Locked On Broncos, Thursday's episode of the show, one thing you can expect, we're going to ask the question, will the Broncos make any big moves on day one to move into round one? Will they maybe trade a player? All options are on the table for the Broncos as the NFL draft kicks off on Thursday. Catch all the coverage here, Locked On Broncos and the Locked On Podcast Network. We're also going to take this case to court here once again. We're going to ask the question, did the offensive line on the interior get better this upcoming season? You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show, let me tell you a little bit about our good friends of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, hosted by Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs, the Draft Dudes. They have you covered on what it's like to build an NFL team, and they go through maybe the team-building philosophy of all teams around the National Football League. From free agency, salary cap management to the NFL Draft, you get all that coverage on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts in audio format or whether you watch on YouTube. As it pertains to the Broncos' interior offensive line, did they get better going into the offseason? That's the question we throw out to ourselves. That's the question we throw out to you in Broncos Country. So if you're watching along on YouTube, make sure you comment on the video down below, like the video as well for the algorithm. Or if you're listening on your favorite audio podcasting platform, make sure you can tweet us as well. We always like your feedback at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. But Sayre, as we always do, I'm going to put on, my judge attire here. I don't necessarily have it. For those of you that see me, I'm not really changing. But let's use the gavel. Let's take it to court. In your opinion, did the Broncos' interior offensive line get better? Yes or no? And your reasoning why?
I'm going to say yes. I think they did get better. And I think we got to look at, the Ben Powers addition at left guard, obviously replacing Dalton Risner. And I think you can kind of look at this from the way that free agency has played out. I mean, the Denver Broncos gave Ben Powers this big money contract to come over from the Baltimore Ravens. As of the time we're recording this, Cody, Dalton Risner still looking for a new team. I think mostly everybody is surprised by that. I'm sure Dalton and his representatives are surprised by that. Kind of feel like everybody thought, man, he's going to get a, 8, 9, 10 million per year from some other team, looking at, his resume as a 4-year starter. But obviously there were things that, we talked about on this show. Other shows talked about it. A lot of people certainly wrote about it. What Dalton Risner did on the field is not quite exactly what we thought after his rookie season in 2019. He didn't quite live up to that year or progress a ton beyond that. Not that everything was his fault on the offensive line, but certainly you look at the Ben Powers acquisition as a potential upgrade at that spot. And I think if you're upgrading at that spot, it definitely raises the level of that unit. I don't think you can necessarily judge, is this position group better just by the depth? Like if you look at last year, the top 3 guys at the position were, Risner, Glasgow, and obviously Quinn Meinerz. Is this group better than that one? I'm going to say yes, even though there's some skepticism from me and others on whether or not Lloyd Cushenberry can be that guy at center.
Yeah, no, I think there's also skepticism from Loki here once again as he's interrupting the podcast. You got to go, dude.
Look at him go.
You mentioned Dalton Risner, and he's like, look, I have some words I need to say about this.
Give me the mic.
And I think what he was going to say is, look, with 5 picks in the 2023 NFL draft, obviously kicking off Thursday, you can have all the coverage here, Locked On Broncos. You're going to get on all the Locked On channels as well, recapping the draft as it happens. So make sure you make the Locked On Network part of your everyday experience here alongside Locked On Broncos. But for me, maybe there's a possibility, Sayre. Maybe that after the NFL draft, depending on what the Broncos do, and because the market has not formulated the way Risner has, do you think the Broncos maybe could re-sign him for a 1-year deal, minimum money? And look, he's going to come in to compete for a backup job. I mean, at this point, that's what his market has kind of garnered, because if he was going to be a starter, Sayre, he would have gotten a contract already for a team that needs a guy there. So at this point, I think maybe that's something that, to throw out there. Would Dalton Risner be open to coming back to Denver on a 1-year minimal deal to try to compete, right? I don't think it's going to necessarily be a prove-it deal because of his struggles, as you alluded to. And Dalton's a great guy on the field, off the field, great human being. The production just has not been there with the Broncos offense since his rookie season. And look, as a rookie, yeah, you had a great season. You want to grow on that. You want to continue to see an upward trend. It didn't quite do that. It kind of stayed linear and then had some peaks and valleys going down and up a little bit. I do think with Ben Powers, it's a huge upgrade to the position for the Broncos. And I think with Quinn Meinerz healthy, I look at those guys there, and look, with Lloyd Cushenberry coming back, obviously there's some things that we've addressed here on the show that we feel like personally he has to get better at, and he's going to get the chance to prove that this year. I do think that the Broncos' interior offensive line is in a better position right now going into the season than they were last year. I think a lot of it as well is, can they maintain that? I don't think it's talked about enough, right? While we talk about the interior line, Sean Payton even mentioned it as well in terms when talking about Lloyd Cushenberry being viewed as the starting center. He believes that the addition of Ben Powers, he even believes that the addition of Mike McGlinchey will benefit him. So while there's continuity there, you're going to build that hopefully with Quinn Meinerz and Mike McGlinchey on the right side. That's going to help really with the interior, because the offensive line, 5 guys have to be in sync. It's like dancing. They have to all have communication down pat pre-snap, during the snap, as it's happening when teams are executing various stunts and twists. You have to be able to communicate, and that goes all the way from the outside to the inside of the offensive line. There simply wasn't enough of that last season, or even the last 2 to 3 seasons, I'd say, for the Broncos overall. So, Sayre, I'm in agreement with you. I do think that they got better this offseason. I also think that the depth is actually in a pretty decent position with guys like Quinn Bailey. Look, I mean, he wasn't drafted high, didn't have a high status, undrafted rookie free agent. He's found a way to stay on. Denver has some other guys as well. I'd be intrigued to see, we talked about offensive tackle. Could Will Sherman maybe play a little bit of interior guard? Could he maybe move there? I mean, this is really going to be about size and, as you mentioned, some length here, which Sean Payton likes. I'm very curious to see what the offensive line room and what the competitions are going to look like at training camp. And I think we'll get a better idea. Once the team does some football stuff on the field, we'll start seeing different things happening. I believe at that point we'll kind of gain some clarity. Okay, hey, this guy's working at this position. This guy's getting some run here. Could be a depth option for them. I actually think Denver on the interior, they're in a better place than they have been in the last 3 years, in my opinion.
And it's going to be fascinating, as you said, to watch as this offseason program develops, which guys are putting on weight, which guys are, taking some weight off. What are they doing there in terms of hey, the coaching staff, they told you, you got to go do this. And so this is what you're working on early in the offseason. I think that's going to be kind of the telltale sign as well. Could be a part of the reason, too, why we're not really getting much info or inside access to, hey, this offseason program's already begun. That could be part of the reason to say, hey, we don't want to give away much of what we're looking for in guys before the draft, and where we're at with certain players. What we're asking them to do could be indicative of how you feel about a certain player or how, short their leash might be. So I'm fascinated to see as it pertains to the interior offensive line, especially after you change schemes drastically. You go from Mike Munchak to the Nathaniel Hackett offense, and now you're going back to Sean Payton's offense where he wants to be big and strong and physical there on the offensive line. Going to be fun to see how these guys all reshape themselves physically and obviously, of course, mentally after the way that things have gone down the last handful of years.
Well, I'm excited to see what the offensive line looks like this upcoming season. We're all hoping and we're all banking on the fact that it will be a much better unit than it was last season. Our fingers crossed. Every time we ask the question, well, it can't get any worse than it has. For some reason, that has always happened to where it gets worse than where it previously was. So I'm going to stop throwing that out there. I'm going to stop saying it can't get any worse because it always can. And we're not in the boat of saying, okay, we don't want that to happen here for Denver. But with that said, Broncos Country, the NFL Draft kicks off on Thursday. You can expect continuous coverage of the Broncos. Will they make any big moves? Tomorrow's episode of the show, for all you everyday listeners, we will be highlighting, could the Broncos maybe creep into round one? Could they trade a player on draft night? You get that on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos. We appreciate you so much, Broncos Country. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time for a brand new episode of the show.